Today I'm going to talk about the campaign sailors from the Royal Navy fought in the Sahara Desert. To understand how they ended up there, first I need to introduce two technologies that made their first appearance in World War I. The first of these would go on to be indelibly associated with the German Navy, the U-boat. Everybody knows of the wolf packs that hunted convoys of merchant ships during the Second World War, but at the outbreak of the First World War, the German Admiralty had no idea what to do with them. They had been in regular naval service since about 1901, but had only become truly useful in 1910 with the introduction of U-9. She was the first submarine with everything that you needed to be an effective weapon. This included a 1,000-mile operational radius, 6 fairly reliable torpedoes, and a gyro compass to make sure that if you fired one, you are probably going in the right direction. 6 torpedoes might not sound like a lot, but these were high-tech and expensive weapons. A British 21-inch torpedo cost £1,000, but with one torpedo hit, a submarine could sink a battleship. And at the start of the war, there was no defence against them. During the Royal Navy manoeuvres in 1912, the captain of HMS Skirmisher was ordered to take his destroyers out and clear the outrage of submarines. He had them steam around, but he had no real way of knowing if there was a submarine around, and he couldn't do anything if there was one. So in 1915, German and Turkish planners dispatched submarines to an area on the north coast of Africa, close to the Egyptian border, that had been abandoned by the Italians. They hoped that they could inspire the local population to attack the British possession of Egypt and cut the vital link of the Suez Canal. They managed to torpedo the British auxiliary cruiser Tara off Sollum, the most westerly British outpost, and the 95 survivors fell into the hands of the Senussi. The Senusi had been in a holy war against Italy and its allies since 1911, when Italy had landed 100,000 men to wrestle the colony from the dying Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans had looked at the numbers and signed a peace treaty, but this had not stopped the Senusi. They were led by Muhammad al-Sharif. He had been elected to lead the sect in 1902 and had millions of adherents along the north coast of Africa willing to carry out the orders that he issued from his headquarters at a remote desert oasis. The only European to ever reach it was a German surgeon who had deserted from the French Foreign Legion, but all he got there was a bullet wound. The loss of the Tara brought the British into the war with the Senusi. A force was dispatched, and this was where the other new technology comes in, as it included several squadrons of the Royal Naval Armoured Car Division under the command of the Duke of Westminster. At the beginning of the Great War, the military establishment had no idea what to do with motorcars. It had left it up to motoring enthusiasts to see what they were capable of. The Duke of Westminster was one of these. He had managed to pick up a speeding fine in 1912 for driving his car at a whole 19 miles an hour in Richmond Park. The fine was £1 and 10 shillings. To anybody else, this would be no laughing matter, but to the richest man in the kingdom, it was the kind of sum he'd lost down the back of the sofa. Nothing could quell the Duke's love of speed, and in 1914 he would be found dodging bullets to deliver dispatches in one of his many motor cars. His Grace had held a commission in the Royal Horse Guard, the predecessor to the Blues and Royals, but he hadn't returned to the colours as an army officer. Instead, he'd chosen to take a commission with the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve after being lured into the Navy by the Royal Naval Armoured Car Division. The Duke had used his personal fortune to buy an entire squadron of armoured cars to command. However, the expanding trench systems made it impossible to operate armoured cars on the Western Front, so they had to be sent elsewhere. Some of them started developing a new weapon that they hoped would break through the trenches and get the war moving again, codenamed the tank. So, when the army came looking for a cruise to crew them, their first stop was the Royal Naval Armoured Car Division. They sent an officer to ask for volunteers, but at the time the tank was so secret that the only thing he could tell them was that they would be demoted from petty officer to private. He called for volunteers to step forward. The front rank swayed and then seemed to lean backwards. The Duke of Westminster squadron, on the other hand, followed their leader and transferred as a block into the army before being sent off to Egypt, where they would be using their armoured cars to fight the Senusi. They were joined by the New Zealanders, the Camel Corps, an Egyptian army machine gun section, and an armoured train manned by Gurkhas. Their first encounter with the enemy was on Christmas Day. The force was advancing in two columns. The main column, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Gordon, was made up of the 15th Sikhs, New Zealanders, the Middlesex Regiment, Royal Buckinghamshire Hussars, and the Nottinghamshire Royal Horse Artillery. The other column, commanded by Brigadier General Biscoe, consisted of 3 squadrons of the Australian Light Horse, 3 squadrons of English Yeomanry, a Yeomanry machine gun section, more men from the Nottinghamshire Royal Horse Artillery, and the Royal Naval Armoured Car Division. The Senusi stronghold was on the edge of a wadi, a dry riverbed. The infantry cleared it out, but the mounted troops arrived too late and allowed the enemy to escape down the seaward end. And this was still a severe blow and shook the Senusi soldiers. They fell back, but the British followed them and engaged them again on January the 23rd. The Yeomanry were the first to engage this time, with the infantry advancing in a firing line that stretched across over a mile of ground, completely devoid of cover. They pushed the Senusi back into their camp and burned it. But once again, the enemy slipped away, because neither the armoured cars nor the cavalry could operate in the thick mud that covered the area. However, these two defeats damaged the prestige of the Senusi. As the British continued their advance, deserters started to appear in the British camp, who said that the casualties on the second battle had been even worse than on the first. They caught up with the remaining Senusi forces on the 4th of February just south of Jerba, 15 miles west of the oasis of Siwa. After an all-day engagement, the enemy set fire to their tents and to destroy their ammunition stores and fled into the night. Most of the fighters headed south, away from the roads and into the waterless desert. But this time, the British did not follow them. Instead, they headed north towards Sollum. Their greatest enemy now was the desert itself. The Senusi had destroyed all of the wells during the retreat, leaving the infantry begging for even a drop of water from the men in the armoured cars, but their machines needed every drop that they had. They could only press forward, as there would be no water until they reached Siwa and made ready for their final assault on Sollum. The attack on Sollum began on the 14th of March, with an aeroplane was sent scouting out the enemy camp, only to discover it was already empty. The Duke of Westminster led the pursuit, and the campfires were still burning when he swept past the Senusi's next camp and reached 40 miles an hour on some of the better stretches of road. They charged the enemy, opening up with the machine guns at 400 yards and scattered hostile forces in all directions. One of the cars spotted one of the Turkish leaders trying to escape on a horseback. The Turk avoided roads and kept to boulder-strewn areas, but the car kept to the horse's tail until he swerved round a rock to a sea of sand dunes where the car could not follow. Stopped by the sand and the danger of their radiator boiling dry in the fierce desert heat, they turned back on Sollum. When they got there, the infantry had already captured all of the enemy artillery and freed the British prisoners from the Tara. The power of the Senusi had been broken. A rival leader rose up to end the conflict and soon offered his submission to Italy. The Duke of Westminster was awarded the Distinguished Service Order for his part in the attack. His cars were sent east to assist Lawrence of Arabia in what would become Israel. The Duke himself returned to England to become the second in command of one of the new tank battalions, 2 of which were commanded by former Royal Naval Armoured Car Division officers. For now, this is the last story that I want to tell from the First World War. Next time I'm going to go back even further to Sierra Leone and look at the beginnings of the West Africa Squadron. If you'd like to go deeper into what the Royal Navy was doing in World War I, all the sources that I used are listed on the website. And